Hi, my name's Morgan C. Leckie, and I'm from Miami University.
And my name is Rory Lee, and I'm from Ball State University.
Our presentation today is called Why Am I Getting Downvoted? The Yak Karma of Rhetorical Failure.
So today we're going to cover the social media app Yik Yak. In doing so, we'll define what Yik Yak is. We'll look into the ways in which failure can be defined on the platform Yik Yak. We'll enter into the ongoing conversation surrounding Yik Yak. In particular, we'll explore issues related to cyberbullying and online harassment. And then we'll finish up by discussing some pedagogical implications, in particular, ways in which we can implement Yik Yak in the first year writing classroom. Launched in 2013, Yik Yak is a mobile app that allows users to post yaks. Yaks are anonymous, tweet-style public posts that are limited to 200 characters. Since 2015, users are allowed to yak images too, but such images could not include illegal or inappropriate content, nor could they include individuals' faces. Once posted, yaks are timestamped and archived within the yak feed. Each user's yak feed is different, displaying yaks posted within a 5-mile radius of the user's location. In 2014, Yik Yak offered a peek feature, which allows users to view yaks in different locations. However, users can only view such yaks. They cannot respond to them, nor up or downvote them. Yaks can then be seen, responded to, and evaluated by other users within the 5-mile radius of where the yak was originally posted. When a yak is displayed on the app, the number of replies is listed underneath it, and to the right there is a number situated between an up and a down arrow. The arrows allow one to vote, and the number between them is an aggregate of upvotes and downvotes. For instance, 10 upvotes and 3 downvotes would give a yak rating of 7. If a yak ever reaches a rating of -5, it is deleted from the yak feed. The individual replies to a given yak can also be up and downvoted. Yik Yak has evolved into a hotspot for university students who want to post their perspectives on everything from campus dining options and questions about individual classes to invitations to Netflix and chill. In thinking with and through our panel's theme of rhetorical failure, we can define failure on Yik Yak in 3 separate ways. 1. Technological glitches. That is, moments of technological malfunction that result in unintentional erasure of a yak. The second is violations of best practices. This includes instances where users post yaks that violate the app's ethos and guidelines to creating an awesome herd of yaks around you. And third, collaborative convergence and consensus. These are times where yaks, for various reasons, receive an aggregate score of -5, which prompts the algorithms to delete the yak from the feed. Another type of failure could be Yik Yak itself, and that brings us to the ongoing conversations surrounding the application. Some, for example, Peter Schmidt, writing for the Chronicle of Higher Education, and Ryan Chapin Mack of the Huffington Post, claim that Yik Yak is a failure in that it promotes cyberbullying and online harassment. And here, as Schmidt illustrates, the victims aren't just students. Unsuspecting teachers are also under attack. Citing racist yaks that inspired protests and a sit-in at Colgate College, which is also featured in the Writing on the Wall podcast by PJ Voigt and Alex Goldman, as well as yaks threatening sexual violence against women at a campus center for women at Kenyon College. Max suggests that campuses should ban the app entirely. A handful of school districts and college campuses have done just that, while many middle and high schools employ the geofences that the CEO and COO designed in response to the multiple cases of cyberbullying. Others, however, have championed the app. For instance, in an opinion piece for Wired, Ray Hunko argues that incidents of cyberbullying and online harassment on Yik Yak are overblown, equating them to the fear people have of flying based on, quote, notable media reports of plane crashes, even though one is more likely to experience a fatal automobile accident than a plane crash in their lifetime, end quote. Despite Hunko's slipshod logic regarding the frequency of and harm inflicted by cyberbullying, he does forward some reasonable and, at this point, well-circulated arguments about the benefits of anonymity. Mainly, Online bystanders are sometimes more likely to intervene when they witness cyberbullying, and anonymity affords people the opportunity to experience with identities in ways they couldn't otherwise. Yik Yak and the anonymity provided can also cultivate a sense of community. According to Hunko, quote, Yik Yak helps students engage in a campus-wide conversation, strengthening their sense of community and allowing them greater levels of social integration. End quote. Hunko wasn't alone in his support of Yik Yak. Writing for Slate, Amanda Hess, who was an infamous victim of online harassment herself, argues that simply banning Yik Yak won't solve the problem of cyberbullying and online harassment. And, like Hunko, she notes that the way Yik Yak can, quote, help build a sense of camaraderie on campus, end quote. Furthermore, she states that, in many cases, students have actually leveraged the app to boost marginalized voices that might not otherwise be heard. As examples, Hess mentions 2 specific rallies, one for those struggling with depression and contemplating suicide at Michigan, and another for gay rights at Duke, that resulted from content shared on Yik Yak. Despite the potential benefits afforded through online anonymity, those at Yik Yak have acknowledged that it's a problem, as evinced by the aforementioned development of geofences, as well as the recent requirement that users create and use a handle, a modification made in an effort to reduce trolling this past March. So, given the controversial nature of Yik Yak, the question begs, should we bring Yik Yak into the classroom? And if so, how can we do so productively?
No. What can we learn from Yik Yak then? And why should we teach with and through a social media platform as potentially problematic as Yik Yak? For me, teaching first-year composition at Miami University in the fall of 2014, when Yik Yak seemed to be all my writing students could talk about, the answers to those questions were rooted less in conversations about Yik Yak itself. Instead, foundational ideas about building a critical digital pedagogy in composition classroom shaped my approach to the quote-unquote toxic anonymous social media site, and catalyzed what became useful discoveries on how to meet students in the spaces where they make meaning in order to examine rhetorical failure, campus and community cultural failure, and writing and research that makes use of even the most criticized available means of persuasion. Pioneered by Paulo Freire, bell hooks, and other critical Marxist thinkers in the field of education, critical pedagogy is an approach to teaching and learning predicated on fostering agency and empowering learners. A critical pedagogy suggests a specific kind of student-centered, liberatory praxis. This is deeply personal and political work, particularly for me, through which educators cannot and do not remain objective deliverers of truth, but rather seek to negotiate truth with students. A digital critical pedagogy, then, has a responsibility to analyze how language, information, and meaning work to organize, legitimate, and circulate values, structure reality, and offer up particular notions of agency and identity. Education and learning now demands a new kind of literacy and critical understanding with respect to the emergence of the new media and electronic technologies and the new and powerful role they play as instruments of public pedagogy. In other words, when I noticed first-year writing students constantly scrolling the screens of their smartphones to ride the yak, essentially to see whether or not their own yaks had been upvoted or downvoted, to respond anonymously to flirtatious or political wit, to check on which classes had been canceled and which sororities were hosting parties, I saw an opportunity to make use of this emerging instrument of public pedagogy and to practice a student-centered and critical approach to the teaching of writing and rhetoric. What can we learn from Yik Yak? So what exactly does Yik Yak reveal when it's examined through a critical pedagogy? In the fall of 2014, I downloaded the infamous app to learn more about what my students were doing. I observed the public composing practices on the site, noticing right away a confirmation of the app's biggest failures and reaffirming many of the criticisms and the conversations we outlined earlier. Indeed, the site seemed a hostile place that facilitated cyberbullying. Yaks and responses that expressed bigoted, bullying, and blatantly racist, sexist, and classist content were often viewed as rhetorically successful by other anonymous site participants, as noted by the number of upvotes. A few listed here, as you can see, received many upvotes and very few downvotes, leaving these yaks to be public and posted. This is just a small sample of the bigoted yaks I encountered on my first day using the app. And the trend I encountered that day reflected many of the worst stereotypes about my campus community. With an undergraduate population that is 77% white and predominantly upper middle class, it was no surprise that the most successful rhetoric on Yik Yak often appealed to the most dominant perspectives on our campus, those of racial and economic privilege. Openly mocking Black and Chinese students and people, belittling local residents who may not be as wealthy as the student population, and finally attacking feminist views were all popular content areas for posts among site users. I was disheartened, but I was also determined to think about these problems as possibilities, these failures of the site, both to discourage hate speech and to encourage marginalized perspectives, as potential spaces of learning with my students. The first thing I did was use Yik Yak in research and audience lessons in a first-year course that same fall. First, I asked students to get out their smartphones and open the application. Of course, after informally polling, I knew already that all 24 students in the class were already using and had the app downloaded on their phones. I then told students to examine Yik Yak's wall of posts, or feed, to research campus values, events, attitudes, and rhetorical practices. In 6 small discussion groups, students were asked to categorize the most popular and present yaks by content and subject matter, style and voice, kairos and context, use of appeals, pathos, logos, and ethos. Each student group focused on one particular area of research and analysis. Students found and mapped the following popular characteristics in their assigned categories. In terms of content, students found that MU squirrel yaks, racist yaks, including Asian jokes and Black jokes, fashion and clothing criticism yaks, which often made reference to poor people, Greek life yaks, including sorority and fraternity events, and of course, shit-talking, sexual frustration and loneliness yaks, and campus and weather commentary yaks were among the most popular content areas. In terms of style and voice, students found that yaks that were funny or witty, angry, smart, mean, or, according to students, jerkish, were among the most popular in terms of voice and approach to the tone of yaks. Yaks featuring correct grammar and spelling that remained fairly brief and that were a little self-deprecating were also stylistically the most popular. In terms of kairos and context, upvoted yaks included mostly local contexts. Happening here and now, yaks included Black Lives Matter protest commentary, yaks that responded to extreme weather conditions like the wind in that particular day, squirrels, of course, again, squirrels, very popular, fall squirrels being all over our campus, classes being canceled, and hangovers resulting from 90s night the night before were among the contextual references made in popular yaks. Some larger contextual references and kairotic approaches included responses to Ebola, Netflix and chill invitations to hang out between one another, missing home, and of course pets as well, and Black Lives Matter movements that were happening nationally that day. Appeals used, or the most popular appeals and effective appeals used according to these student groups included appeals to pathos that used humor, aggression and anger, or sexual or titillating and flirtatious yaks. Not so popular in terms of yak failures were sad or quote-unquote what they called emo or pathetic yaks that encouraged sympathy or asked for pity. In terms of appeals to logos, students found that there was some logic happening on Yik Yak in terms of advice students gave one another through the yak, including some listed here. Don't wear a dress because it's windy, If you're hungover and miss class, don't drink before a midterm next time. But some of the more problematic logic that was being appealed to included criticisms of the Black Lives Matter protest that was happening on our campus that day, including, well, Black people are being ridiculous and not logical. Students of color, of course, protesting the conditions not only in Ferguson at that time in 2014, but also the racial tensions that existed on our own campus. Finally, in terms of ethos, students found that relying on using smarts and humor helped build credibility in terms of a Yik Yak audience. Mostly a white and rich ethos was upvoted, and that making a fake ethos, like Your Angry TA, and Miami Squirrel, that is yakking as a teaching assistant or as a squirrel, helped actually make your yaks more popular. As you might notice from these student-generated data codes, first-year composition students were completely able to think critically about the site's content and genre conventions in order to assess what elements led certain yaks to remain public and certain yaks to quote-unquote fail or be downvoted into silence. Essentially, by asking students to code the data from a writing space they felt authorized to enter and make meaning from, they were able to map and thus interrogate some of the app's biggest problems, as well as map and interrogate local problems within our community. It was obvious to students, as it had been to me, that bullying and hate speech were met with audience approval on the site. This made us all consider the role of dominant ideologies and subjectivities of audiences, how we invent and invoke them when we compose online, in terms of who decides what public rhetoric fails or succeeds. Many of the students in my class, all of whom were white in that particular course, were caught off guard by some yaks that were analyzed as failures due to downvotes, but that invited them to think about non-dominant members of our campus community and how those individuals felt when they read the yaks of fellow undergraduates reacting to the Black Lives Matter protest happening on campus that day. The Yik Yak post countering and challenging racist views, for example, helped student members of the dominant group in our community recognize that the views of other groups are actually silenced by literally watching these non-dominant yaks downvoted into oblivion. Listed here are some of the least popular or failed yaks that my students analyzed that day. As you can see, they were voiced by students who were non-white and, in fact, not part of an upper middle class group. A sobering comment came from one thoughtful student in my course that day. Damn, just because it's upvoted doesn't mean it's not completely wrong. The app platform itself, with its anonymity and its collaborative convergence and consensus that is so often criticized as a failure, enabled students in my class to see and therefore literalize the anonymous and groupthink silencing of marginalized voices. This lesson that I outlined is only one example of how Yik Yak and emerging sites like it offer opportunities, not just problems, opportunities to enact student-centered critical digital pedagogies and engage local contexts, problems, and failures in order to help cultivate civic participation and rhetorical mindfulness. Over the past 2 years since this particular lesson plan, Rory and I have both encouraged undergraduate professional writing, media studies, and women and gender studies students, as well as graduate digital pedagogy students, to explore the potential value in the glitches, problems, and failures of new media spaces like Yik Yak. Integrated media studies students in my classes use Goldman and Voigt's Reply All audio essay as a model for producing audio projects focused on local contexts, narratives, and problems that exist in physical and cyber spaces.
In my professional writing, undergraduates explore how Yik Yak does, and mostly does not, work as a platform for viral marketing campaigns.
My women and gender studies students attempt to intervene in sexist discourses by downvoting and posting pro-feminist responses to dominant and marginalizing yaks. And finally, the research and ideas that we're sharing today help encourage new graduate student teachers of writing and rhetoric how and why we need to embrace the modes and spaces where non-academic composition happens and is consumed in order to enact a critical digital pedagogy for the 21st century.
After all, we are still guided by one of NCTE's 2009 reports on literacies for this new era of teaching, and it reminds us and the teachers we guide that, quote, perhaps students are right, and there is little correlation between writing that one does for academic purposes and everyday literacy practices outside of school. But if it is true, we are missing an opportunity. By bringing together a portrait of the kinds of writing that matter to everyday citizens with tips and insights on how to write well, at least we should better understand the gap between formal and informal writing. And at best, we can begin to make real progress toward changing the school writing experience to better prepare students for a future that is sure to include ever more complex tools and purposes for writing.
Dismissing sites like Yik Yak as problems or as merely perpetuating negative interactions and communications with our students and teachers is too cursory a glance at sites like these that can offer us a lot of opportunity as teachers and, of course, as students to think together and make new meanings out of the contexts where increasingly our lives take place. Thank you so much for letting us share our ideas and thoughts today. And you can contact me at leckymc@miamiuniversity.edu.
And you can contact me at rlee2@bsu.edu.
Thank you.